Welcome to today's hands-on live lab workshop. The goal of today's live lab is to explore new technologies and frankly learn together. So today it's brought to you by Worldwide Technology and WWT.com. I am your host, Brandon Swagman. A couple housekeeping rules. Please, as you have questions, feel free to ask them in the WebEx chat, and I will do my best to proxy them over to our guest, Mike Lasfer. And the other is you must be a customer of WWT.com to launch the lab. So with that, I thank you for your time and interest today. Please ask questions in the WebEx chat. With that, Mike Lasfer, do you mind introducing yourself?
Thanks, Brandon. So hi, I'm Mike Lasser. I'm a technical solutions architect here at WWT in ATC Solutions Development. I've been with WWT for about 10 and a half years. My focus is really on the broadband access space and adjacent technologies like optical networking, Kubernetes, and things like that. So today we're going to be covering the Cisco Passive Optical Networks Learning Path. Specifically, we're going to be talking about the Routed PON lab that we have. So Cisco calls their PON solution Routed PON, and we'll get into that in a bit details more. But first, I want to show you all how to get to these locations. So here is our WWT platform. It's really the gateway to everything we do. So you can find out information about us, find our ATC, our labs and learning and things. So today we'll go to the Learn From Us. We'll go to Labs and Learning. This will take us to the page where it has our labs and learning again. So we will specifically go to Library. And then this will list the labs and learning. We can sort by types if we want to. I'm going to go and search for Cisco PON and navigate to it. So this will bring us to the Cisco Passive Optical Networks learning path. You will have to enroll in it to access the content. So should have a button around here or here to enroll in it. Once enrolled, you'll have access to all of the various content and access to the lab for this. So before we actually talk about the Cisco solution a bit, I want to cover a bit of terminology and information on passive optical networks for those that may not know it. So while I'm not going to go through all the articles in general, I'm going to use some of the pictures here. So in a passive optical network, there's really three major components. So we have our optical line terminal that's at our central office. It doesn't have to be at a central office. It can be at telecom cabinets, which kind of is generally where they're more deployed in the field and things. So those are your optical line terminals. That is your network side termination for the PON network. So that's where your NNIs or network to network interfaces connect to. So that's really where it drops all of your customer traffic or whatever you're connected to on the other end traffic onto here. I call it a service provider network, but it can really be any sort of core network where you want your traffic dropped off to. So if it's an enterprise network, you can drop it off onto the enterprise network. If you have a manufacturing network, it can drop it off onto there. But that's what the OLT does. And then it also manages the control of your ONTs or ONUs, which are your optical network terminals or optical network units. That's really your subscriber side or client side or user side interface. So that's where your user to network interface has. Now, there are generally some OEMs may call them ONTs, so optical network terminals. Some may call them ONUs, which are optical network units. It should be noted that essentially they're the same thing, but often optical network terminals are meant for like single family homes or single user things, where optical network units may be for businesses or cell towers or multi-family or MDUs, multi-dwelling units.
Mike, you did mention that an enterprise use. So the deployment pattern you have depicted on the screen is very much a service provider. You have central offices and you have houses. What would you imagine this to look like deployed within a traditional enterprise?
So it would be deployed like you're pretty much, we'll say this, instead of your optical network, well, your homes and things, you may have those for separate floors and things. So your access or a row of desks, for example. You may have an optical network terminal that would be like at the end of a row with 4 or 5 network ports on it that will go out to all the desks. Again, specific enterprise, where you may normally have like a telecom closet, I guess, where you would have a switch, distributing normally to all this stuff. That would basically be replaced by a passive splitter. So you don't have to have an active unit there anymore. So that's one of the advantages of it, is with the passive splitter, you lose your active devices. So there's no powered device to worry about there. And if we're talking more of, let's say, some non-enterprise uses, maybe you're looking at like oil fields or utilities or places where you may have to go relatively long distances, because this uses single mode fiber, pretty much from your optical line terminal out, you have about 20 kilometers you can go before you need to throw anything else in there. So it really saves on the amount of active devices you'll need, and maintenance and things that would happen with that.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Factory floors too. That's a very good one too. So as I kind of alluded to there, kind of the magic that makes this all work is your passive splitter there, which, as it says, it just splits your optical signal into invariants. So generally, it's an even split across all of your after the split legs. But if you want, you could, like they make splitters where it could be 80-20 to some units. You can actually buy them however you want your power split, if, say, some legs need to go further than others. So you can have an uneven distribution of how that goes out to your network. So that, in a nutshell, is kind of how passive optical networks work. Read through the article. There's more details because you have wavelengths and some other things on how these things. And I guess I should note on another piece, these all generally operate over a single fiber. So just a note, less fiber to lay out there than normal things. Now I'm going to head over and discuss a bit about the Cisco PON solution. Now, traditionally, your optical line terminal, hopefully I'm just calling that OLT from now on just to shorten things, is a dedicated box in the field or wherever you provide it, be that a pizza box style thing, a shelf with multiple line cards or whatever. It's its own separate discrete box, that goes. They also have some limited routing features. So generally you wouldn't see things like MPLS or segment routing and, some of the more, I'll say service provider-y, but carrier grade features able to do in those said boxes. So what Cisco's solution differs from that is because your OLT in this case is just going to be, I'll get down here, a pluggable that goes into any XGS port in certain NCS routers. So they are only available to work with certain NCS routers because they need to make sure that they have the amount of available RAM, compute power, and things. But in this case, it gives you a scalable architecture that allows you to put PON anywhere that you have these NCS routers installed. So if you may have them already installed running business services, you may just have them out on the edge somewhere. You may just use them to connect to your core network that, as your BGP router or whatever at an office. All of these things, as long as you have something within 20 kilometers of that, actually allows you to throw this SFP in there, as long as it has 10 gig supported ports, and then turn that NCS router into a PON device. So adding this to your access network.
So when I think NCS, I think very large optical networks, oftentimes service provider networks. My background itself is in enterprise networking. What would be the difference between an NCS router and a traditional enterprise router one would see?
So generally, one of the big differences, if we just stick to Cisco for a moment, when you switch to NCS, and I'm going to say these more carrier grade routers, one of the biggest things that you move into is you're starting to use iOS XR instead of more of their business use and other things. This allows for some of the more advanced routing capabilities like segment routing v6, SRv6, MPLS, which you can generally do on most of your business routers too these days. And you get advanced timing features, which generally you might for instance, for if you took a Nexus router or whatever you would use, you may only have standard PTP. You probably don't have your telecom profiles that you can use, may with some certain ones, but generally you have a limited telecom scope, timing scope that you can use with these, which big difference for, especially in places like financial world, if you want to have these as PTP things on the edge. And obviously service provider, where timing is really important as well for your different radios and nodes and things that hang off of it. And it also allows, with these routers, they're generally more scalable. So they can start very relatively small, I'll say, all the way up with you when you get to the larger NCSs to a much larger capacity. But all of them still use iOS XR, which again, enables some more security programmability and things that you might not see with your normal enterprise routing. And then again, timing, you can use DWDM with some of these, and it really just enables a lot more features than you'd be able to do because often you wouldn't need a lot of those things on the business network, but they are there. As we see, these enterprise and business networks actually look more kind of service provider-y as they need to do these things with IPv6 and things kind of growing and growing. So a lot of these, everything can do IPv6, but with your segment routing v6 and MPLS v6 and all that fun stuff, you get to do a lot more things, basically.
A lot more things in the box. Got it.
Would have been the easy way to put it. So this gets deployed as just a pluggable OLT that goes into your NCS routers. So it'll be certain sets of NCS 540s and NCS 5500/5700s that can work there. I am missing one because they did just throw in support for an NCS 57C3-mod. So I am missing that here. But otherwise, that's how they work. So their solution consists of 4 things, obviously. Well, technically 5 things, but it's mainly 4. The first one we already discussed with OLT pluggable. The second thing is actually the PON controller, which, I'll just stick with my main diagram here. It'll make more sense. Is the PON controller, which actually gets installed on the NCS router itself. That's why we have to have certain amounts of RAM and capabilities in there. So this actually it gets installed as a normal package, and I'll just give a behind the scenes look here in a second at that, which actually installs and runs a Docker container on that NCS host router itself. So just as a quick behind the scenes to show what I was talking about. So on this, this is just a package that is running on the NCS router. This PON controller package, which spins up and then we'll go a bit further, a Docker container in there, which allows it to communicate back to your MongoDB and then ultimately your PON manager. So the PON controller basically sends all the information to the OLT and ultimately the ONUs, and also gathers all the monitoring and all that information to be able to send it out. So the PON manager is really your next part here. What that is a web GUI based application that allows you to do all of your configuration management, statistical checking, alarm management, user control, and all the general things that you would need to control your PON system. So this is a not necessary component, but they also offer the capability to add an external netconf server, so you can send traditional netconf commands and things if you want to hook up standard API-based OSSs/BSSs behind it. So, and that 5th piece I was kind of talking about is kind of where all the things happen, which is this MongoDB. So what that does is it basically everything, so the PON manager doesn't directly talk to the PON controller. It actually sends all the information to the Mongo database here. I did not mean to do that. The Mongo database here. And that then at every polling cycle, the PON controller pulls the information down, the configurations and all the action stuff, sends it to the OLT, which will then send it over OMCI, which is just a management and control interface for your PON network. that ONTs use to record information, record faults, and all that fun jazz. And then likewise, the PON controller sends the information that it's recording from statistics and everything from the rest of the items up to your MongoDB. And then every polling cycle, the PON manager pulls that information and makes it viewable to the user. So the next piece, now that we're finally to the lab piece, if we go to the Routed PON Manager lab, if you guys, I'm going to talk about this a bit. If you all want to open this, because it will take a second, a few, maybe up to a minute to log in. So in the PON Manager lab, because because I brilliantly made that a clear drawing, I won't do it that way. So for the lab itself, we have an NCS 540, which is connected to the drawing shows two ONUs, but I actually added a third one just so we can see some more interesting things just for this lab. So there's actually a third ONU here. We have VMs behind it, traffic running all over this. And I have as my SP network, like I showed in the other picture, I have MLMV. So MLMV, I will do a side note on, is our multi-layer, multi-vendor lab that WWT has. So this, as the name describes, has multiple vendors in there, and multi-layer from layers 0 through 3 technologies that are there. So you can go from optical all the way through different types of segment routing, MPLS, SRv6, you have traffic engineering, and then multiple network controllers in there like NSP, CNC, our Crossworks network controller, Cisco HCO, and things. So it's a big environment that you can go and do everything. Now, this isn't a SP network. I'm just using it as an example for one. This can be any of your core networks. So if you have interest in that, go check it out. You can see more details on that page there. But it gives us a good example. So in this, so if you registered and launched the lab, it should launch you into your lab gateway. In here, I'm already logged in. On the left-hand side, you'll see your documentation, which will have all this stuff. This bar is adjustable. So if you want to expand it like that, you certainly can to fit your needs. Personally, I usually do this with 2 screens. So you can go up here to this, next to this PON Manager title, click it, and it'll launch it in a new window. And then you'll be able to have 2 screens for your lab gateway, and then you're not looking at the same things all the time. So once you get logged in, it takes you to your dashboard, which is kind of just a summary of everything that you have going on in your PON system. So on the left, it'll tell you the number of PON controllers, the number of OLTs, and the number of ONUs, and if there are any alarms firing on any of these. If there is, for example, here I have one ONU that has an alarm. You can click it. It will tell you the ID of the ONT/ONU. I'm just going to say ONU so I don't keep doing the slash every time. But the ID of it, which will actually be its serial number, what the alarm is. In this case, it's disabled, the OLT MAC address that it's connected to, and the controller that it's connected to. So the dashboard, just a quick overview. Now, if you had multiple databases, you could change the ones up here, but generally you wouldn't have multiple ones that you'd be connected to. I'm going to kind of skip ahead as opposed to going directly into networks like the lab manual has, just to hit some of the global config pieces.
Mike, I'm going to interrupt you for a second. You keep referring to the lab manual. So anybody that's looking at the lab or has launched the lab, is something you want to do outside of the event today. This lab manual or lab guide on the left-hand side gives you step-by-step instructions how to walk through this. So if you're not familiar with the Cisco PON interface, the lab guide includes screenshots in the order of operations on what to click, how to do, and what to look for. Sorry.
No, perfect, because I probably would have skipped mentioning that. So thanks for that. So, and my view is going to look slightly different because I am logged in on as an admin for this. I guess I should note that the lab is a read-only lab, so you won't really be performing a lot of actions in it. You'll just be viewing and monitoring statistics and doing everything that maybe an operator that is just a monitor would do at a tap or whatever, just monitoring things. So I'm going to go to global config. So in this area, global config, as one would assume, contains different configurations that go into everything as part of Cisco PON Manager or Routed PON Manager. So it starts on the alarms tag, which allows you to configure the alarms, their status for each of the different sets. So for instance, we have controllers, OLTs, ONUs, what they fire as. So if we want to change these, again, you probably won't have these buttons here because of how you're logged in, but you can change the values, create new alarms that you want, and then, also see which ones are there. Likewise for the OLTs, not terribly exciting. Again, the same things. You're basically just configuring the alarms, how they show, and what they should warn you that's happening with it for all of these. These ONUs, again, exact same thing, but they extend to different types because if we had 10G EPON, we are only running XGS PON, so that's not a big deal. We can also change views, which I'll show you later on. The SLA, I generally refer to this just as your bandwidth profiles because that's what most people will see it as, your bandwidth or speed tiers. So it comes default with a min and max, but you can create your own. So for instance, I've created a 500 meg duplex tier here. It will have all the different variables that you need that would go into that speed tier, your guaranteed rates, your best effort rates, your best efforts in general, what your speed is going to be for your consumers. If you have business customers or things, you might want to have your best effort and your guaranteed rates to equal the same. So you want to guarantee that they have a 500 meg rate. Likewise, if you're an enterprise, you might same for the upstream. So I'll show a bit later on how to create these as well. Services, so this one's a bit interesting. So this is not necessarily a service in the common sense, but these are tied to specific ONUs if you want to have specific services based on certain vendors' ONUs. So they are all set. So we have Alpha, we have these different vendors and how they have. So you'll have like unmodified. So that would be traffic passing the ONU, doesn't get a tag to it or doesn't get anything. We have the different services. Some of these will have triple play services. So it'll have a POTS or phone port. It'll have a video configuration in it and the various things. Down in the OMCI, this shows all the different settings that will go into it. And if you're curious about any of the configurations that would go, you can always go see. It'll tell you what that OMCI portion means if you wanted to go and create your own items here, or if you wanted to modify it. And then at the bottom here is kind of a visual mapping of how all of this works. It's kind of hard to see with this one, but it's basically tells the service details that go of your traffic container, your GEM ports, your other various aspects of the ONU and how the service will flow through it if you went and applied these types of service. Your downstream QoS map, generally you're going to have these, 1-for-1, but if you wanted a certain cost value to be with a different, once it actually goes past the OLT, you could say 2. For some odd reason, you wanted them to have different values. Maybe it's just how the customer or business assigns things. You want it to translate differently once it hits the OLT. You can change your mapping here and create new ones. Files section. The pictures one isn't too exciting. It's literally just adding pictures to your thing. So for instance, if you want pictures of devices, you want to change your branding on here, you want to do anything like that, your pictures folder is not very fun. Your OLT firmware, this will be before you need to, likewise for the ONU firmware, when we get there, you'll have to upload your OLT firmware to the Cisco PON Manager before you can actually upgrade or downgrade any of your OLTs and ONUs in the system. So you would do that here, upload your software. All your database will be confined here. Likewise with service configs, if you want to, these would just be JSON files that get uploaded for your service. You would go through and do that. Databases, if before you start, you have to initialize a database. Since I already have that done, it's not a big deal, or after you upgrade. This will show all the different configurations that you have. If you want to update to new versions after you've upgraded. Likewise, if you want to manage how they're connected and whatnot. Devices allows you to pre-provision items. So if you don't actually have these, your PON controller, you don't have your switch, you don't have your ONUs already configured in your network, you can pre-configure them to be added here. And they will get added, they'll go to a spot in your network tab where they'll get added once they actually come online. And your inventory, you can generate a device inventory, which will list all your PON controllers. Actually, I believe you guys can do this if you would like to. All your PON controllers, your switches / routers, your OLTs and ONUs that are in the system. Now, this is where most of your actual time would be spent in PON Manager, which will be in the network tab. So these will be tree values, and you will see most the same. So if you want to go and expand your management LAN to start, and then also expand your topology, and then just as a side note, if you do these unattached devices down here, if you pre-provision things and they haven't yet come online, they will go into that unattached devices location. But I'll keep expanding the topology piece. You'll notice that they look similar, and they are similar after you get to the OLT. So for example, I can click the OLT down here, it'll also select it up here. If I click one of the ONUs down here, it'll also select it down here. So these screens are exactly the same from the OLT past, the pluggable pass in this case. I mean, besides up here, it's listing its MAC, down here, it's listing the port that it's actually in, along with the MAC address. So the management LANs up here, this unnamed piece, if you want to group your controllers in your system based on however you want to do it. So if they want to be named for a certain location, you can group them all together. They start as unnamed. If you don't name everything, everything will get shoved in the same pool. If you want to group them, say you had a St. Louis one, you had a Philadelphia one, you would change their management VLANs here so that they would all be grouped together. So that would actually get changed in your OLT and PON controller piece. But for now, I'm going to click on the PON controller. The summary gives you an overview of the PON controller that you selected. Any of the information, your software running, your OLT counts, your ONU counts. The identification is a bit more interesting. So it will give some of the same information. This also allows for you to configure your location coordinates if you want. So I have it configured here with its latitude and longitude. So if you click this location coordinates, it will actually take you and show you on a map where you have those, that pointing to. So here, I have this hosted at our building 60 at our ATC. It'll give you your MAC addresses of the PON controller, and also it'll list all of the ports that are present. Now, of course, because the PON controller exists on a switch, in this case, or router, it will list all the router ports that are active. Well, and if you have IP addresses assigned to them, kind of for everything in the system. Firmware, this portion just allows you to modify the amount of parallel, because again, the amount of upgrades that we can actually do at the same time. Again, we have very semi-limited resources in that Docker container because it is a fairly light Docker container that we're running. So everything will be pushed by the controller running on that NCS router. So because there are semi-limited resources, you wouldn't want to do a ton at a time. And you'll see this again once we get to the OLT. But if you want to change this number, you can. From 16 is the default. Probably a good number. You don't want to be pushing. If you want to do a radius configuration for all of your users when they log in or need to log in, or for other security aspects, You can configure your radius configuration under authentication. Here, I'm not particularly using it, but I do have a server configured in case, it needs to be done. Your OLT inventory, as one would expect, pretty much lists all the OLTs that are connected to this controller. Now, again, you'll generally have multiple OLTs per controller but the controller will only manage the OLTs that are in that switch/router that it's in. Monitoring allows you to monitor all of the different aspects. So if we click show statistics, now these get a little more interesting once we get to the actual ONUs and OLTs themselves. But for instance, if I want to go down here, any of these that you click, let's go to the UMT relay. So if I expand that, go to these, any of the items that you select will actually start immediately being graphed. And you can see these are, the current refresh should be 5 seconds. So every 5 seconds, it's going to be refreshed. You can change how long you want it to go back for everything for your various statistics. Again, this is directly related to the controller. So it's not the OLT statistics per se. So you won't see things. The config is your alarm configuration and how everything that you have set up for that. Same with the alarms. This will show everything that's active and your logs if you want to. In this case, we don't have this is only going to show the logs of alarms and errors that are happening for the controller itself, not the pieces that the controller are controlling. Sounds weird. Operations page. So generally, this just tells you how long the OLTs and things can be active. But as I was saying before, this unnamed piece, if you want to group them, that's where you would change the management LAN that they're connected to. So if you had, say, 10 that you wanted connected, you would have them all named as unnamed. If you had, or named in that location, for the other group that you may have, you'll change the management LAN here. And then it'd be, I guess I can, just for fun, change that. And they'll all start being grouped together. So you have all your stuff. You can delete your controller, which probably don't want to do that in an active network, but it would actively delete it. So if we go to the MAC address here, or we click on the 10 gig down here, it'll take you to the OLT. This is going to be pretty similar, like set of options that you saw with the other one. In your main page, it'll show you the summary of the alarms, your ONUs, and also different here. So this shows you the provision bandwidth for this OLT. So since I currently have 2 ONUs that are connected, and they're both on max, I have 20 gigs of traffic provision for this. Not a problem because it is shared bandwidth, but be aware, both these users wouldn't be able to do 10 gigs at a time. So it is important to notice how much of, in particular, your guaranteed bandwidth that you have for all of the users' provision. Your identification, again, same thing. It'll show all the information, the firmware running, the serial numbers for this OLT itself. You can go and configure the location, the addresses, your netconf name, so that you could find them, again, on a map. Unsurprisingly, this is in the exact same location. So the firmware tab, now this is where you would actually go to, hopefully this loads for me. You would actually go to upgrade your firmwares of your OLTs. So that would work by, once you have a software version, you would change it in one of these banks. So in this case, I changed it to this earlier release, so it'd be a downgrade. And then you would select which one to actually load software from. Click save, it'll run through, it would go start doing the update for that OLT, and then come back online once it's finished. The ONU, like before, this is just a max number of parallel because, again, limited on compute. In this case, it's actually using some of the compute on the OLT side. So you set your max number of parallel firmware upgrades. Services is a little more interesting, and I should probably speed up a little. So these are specific services for each of your ONUs. So this first one, I'm going to have this ADT in. Notice nothing's here. This is my ONU that I do not have configured at all here. So we'll go through in a bit, add that, and I can show you how to provision everything. But let's go to one that we actually have, which is the second one. We see all these green lines, which means it's configured, it's operating properly. So from here, this allows you to create your services for each of the ONUs, the NNIs that are on here, all the way through to your CPE. And you can have up to 8 services per ONU. Now, these can be varied. You can have just adding a C tag like we're doing here at the NNI/OLT level. So this will be a VLAN 210 that gets added here. It gets passed untagged through your PON network, and it's passed from the ONU to your CPE untagged. If, for instance, this was, let's say, a business or MDU, and you want each of these to be on different VLANs, you can have tagged traffic from your ONU. So each one would be different VLANs. Once it would hit the ONU, it would translate that tag to a different tag to go through your PON system, so it all looks as the same. So just for an example, this is what it looks like when you're editing. So as I was stating, 0, we're not adding any S tags. We're not having double tagged here, not tagging on the PON network. We'll see that in a second once I add this other one. Your ports have both your PON ports. You describe your activity that you'd like on the OLT/ONU on the actual PON side, what modes you're running, if it's enabled or not, your distance, your discovery period, and your NNI is how it reacts to the actual NCS router itself, which, convenient, will go here. So through our NNI, we can actually modify all these settings. Important things to note. 1, you can actually see your MAC table here of all the CPEs learned behind it. Your DHCP, and you can, if you're going to actually have DHCP, I can't even think of the relay going here, same with your PPOE, or if you're ignoring them. Note, if you do want to have DHCP relay, you'll have to actually put this to UNT mode in your NNI network, and it'll need to be configured in another place. And to start combining things, so the ONU inventory, again, shows you your inventory. This is the first part where when you add new ONUs, you'll have to go here for it. So I'm going to, because we have this first one where if we see, it's unspecified, so it's not registered. Again, you would go here, click this add. It'll tell the OLT to add it and MongoDB to add it to its database. Click save. It's added it. It's going through, figuring out the state that it needs to be in. Then once we go to a couple of different places in a second, this will actually get added. But now that we know it's there, it's supposed to be there. Skipping, just keep that in the back of your mind for a second. On the OLT stats page, this is where it starts getting a little bit more important as you're actually monitoring your traffic, your users, the temperature, your transmit and receive power, and things like that. It also gives the opportunity, if you have a standalone Grafana database elsewhere in your network, you can actually configure it here. It will send the statistics to that Grafana database as it's set up for your dashboard. And then once it's there, you can launch your Grafana dashboard directly from here. I do not have that configured on here, but it is there. So one of the things, if I can actually remember, So as I was saying, your bandwidth is one of the things that you generally would want to. I'll just do the 1 for now. So we can see our Ethernet bits per second that we're doing. This is across everything on the OLT. Likewise, we can go and see the ONU stats. We'll be able to see the exact same thing. In this case, it's going to show you all the statistics for the summary of them, plot them on a chart, and along with if they have, so if I do a TX and RX level here, it will plot them with different colors so that you can see the variables in each one. Again, I don't have that third one's laser turned on yet, so that's why it's not saying anything. You can configure your monitoring. These are, again, the same type of things that we saw in past tabs. So the alarms, again, I have this one that has a laser off. We'll fix that shortly. We can see logs on certain times. Debug, we can debug the whole OLT operations. If we want to reset, delete, or allow certain types of ONU registration, we can do that in the operations tab. Again, you guys probably don't see this because they're read-only. And protection. So this is an important one, which I guess I haven't talked about OLT. So PON networks have 3 types of protection. Well, technically 4, although the 4th one's really not used anymore, just like any other network would. Protection type A is, or PON protection type A is kind of boring. It's what you'd think. So type A is just having dual uplinks to your OLT. Type B is basically a port protection, which is where this would come into play. So basically you would have a active port and a standby OLT port. It'd be in cold standby. These would then connect to you'd have 2 input ports on your splitter instead of a single one, or you might have a 2-to-1 combiner, then go out to the field, then go to your splitter. But basically, you would have redundant links. So if one of those ONTs fails, it knows to switch it back over to the standby OLT after a certain amount of time. You would configure this here if you had a second OLT in your system, and it'd basically become a protection pair. These are kind of more important as in enterprise networks as in manufacturing networks and things like that. Don't get used as often in PON networks. And then just for completeness, I'll say there's a type C protection, which basically means you have double fiber. You have 2 splitters, you have everything, so double of everything going all the way to where your ONT is. And then at the ONT, you'd have a 2-to-1 combiner so that they would be combined back all the way. So if anywhere along that path you have a break, it can actually have redundant pairs there, so you're good to go. So we will click on this add tran one, since now it's showing registered, so it knows it's there. So what this piece does, this is kind of similar. There's going to be more data on your summary page here. So we have our OLT status. We can see our OLT transmit power, our ONU receive power, and the reverse, our OLT and ONU. I have this ONU still disabled because we haven't enabled it, which we'll do here in a short amount of time. And then it will also show your speeds and whatnot for the services that are applied to it. Identification, again, it'll show all the information on this OLT, or ONU, my bad. Your controllers, what it's hooked to, etc., serial numbers, firmware. This acts exactly the same as the OLT firmware would. So you would add your software to a bank, tell it what to do. If we want to upgrade, which bank to go to, give it the information, tell it to go, it'll start its upgrade. Now all of these you can send with like restconf and netconf commands, or if you wanted to do curl commands, etc., from Linux to talk to it. So you wouldn't have to necessarily do that through the PON controller itself, or PON Manager itself. But the OLT services is actually where you assign your services that go to your customer. So this is where we'll go to activate the rest of this ONT services. So we would go down here because I say our service configuration is disabled. That means the ONU is disabled. I'm just going to say it's unmodified, which means unmodified after the CPE. So it's just going to be pass traffic as it is. And you also would have to select which uni ports. So your customer, basically your LAN, your copper ports coming off of your OLT that you want active. This will go into showing you that it's changing its state to here. Here's its current state. And it will also give me a warning that says I have this service enabled, but it's not configured here. So what we will do is go enable that service, which enables it on the ONT. If we want a QoS map, we can add it. I will do none for now for this one and give it a name. I will call this HSI. The SLA that we want for it, I will currently say we'll do a 1 gig duplex on it. Save. That will enable that service. It's turning the ONT on so that it's actually can do that. We can see the ONU bandwidth, and we can see our total OLT bandwidth configured is now 21 gig because this one's configured and going. As I stated before, there were 2 places if you want DHCP relay to actually go. That first one is enabling it on the NNI port. The second one is you actually have to enable it here on the ONU OLT service page as well by turning it to host, which basically tells you DHCP relay is going to go to the host router and then out to the network. If you don't do this, you won't have DHCP relay. Might not be a big deal for you. Might. Depends on how your network's set up. Then quickly, for the ports, this is if we had the opportunity, in other cases, we're not here, it's just XGS PON, but if we wanted to, we could change this to a 10GE PON if that was something that we'd like to do. We can also adjust the MTU sizes, everything that's going your customer side, which will your uni side. So if we wanted to allow larger frames, we wanted to do PoE if it accepted it. And likewise for the next one, none of my ONTs have POTS ports, but if they did, you would go and configure them here. I will go to a different one because I don't actually have a CPE sitting behind that. Our CPE page gives all the information for our CPEs that are sitting. Your CPE is customer premise equipment, so it could be a router, it could be whatever you have sitting behind the OLT. It could be a wireless access point, etc. It'll give you all the information you have. If we have DHCP, we will be able to see it going through. Same with PPoE, any of these other actions. And monitoring will be similar to how we did it for the OLT, except in this case, it will only show the statistics for the ONU that we're on. So instead of listing all of them, it will only list the ones for this ONU. If we wanted to check our PON statistics, and I can never find these right away, so I'll just do a transmit. You can see our transmit bits per second. Likewise, we could do receive. We can add all these different statistics that we want to check and plot. Again, if we wanted to add these to Grafana, just for ease of use, you can do that here. And alarm profile configuration, if we have current alarms, logs for everything that happened, and debug, we can generate a debug just like before. So most of these are generally, hopefully you notice a trend that they have many similar options in each section, I'll call it, between the OLTs, the controllers, and the ONUs themselves. And the last piece, which I will actually do on this one, is on the operations side, say we have a customer that leaves, they're having problems, we want to delete this ONT because it got out of our system or we replaced it. You can quickly just go ahead. This will reset and delete the modem. It'll delete it from the database. We can see it going offline here. Once it comes back, it'll show back as the unregistered because it doesn't realize what that ONT actually is anymore because it's cleared from the database. So in a nutshell, that's everything.
So you walked through quite a bit of content there pretty quickly. I know it's a hour-long learning path consolidated down into about 40 minutes of conversation there. I kind of, what, if you're hoping for the audience to take away one lesson from today, walking through the Cisco PON solution, what is that lesson you hope for them to leave today?
That it's very easy especially if they already have these NCS routers in their network, it's very simple to add PON services, either say they're a service provider going to customers because they may already have a bunch of these deployed for, say, business services already. Or if you're an enterprise wanting to do these or manufacturing, that it's very easy to add these PON services to your network by just installing this SFP, running a lightweight controller and a lightweight PON manager. And then, you're up and running with PON services. And then there's one other piece that I meant to hit, and it's really kind of about the whole routing and everything you can do with this. Because this is just a pluggable that goes into your NCS 540, it acts like any other Ethernet port. You don't have to think of it when you're configuring your routers as anything other than that. So it just becomes part of your routed network at that point. So your routing guys don't have to do anything special there. So they don't need to learn new things necessarily to manage that.
What is something behind the scenes as you were building out this lab, building out this learning path, that aha moment, that thing you didn't expect? What is something that jumps out at you while building this?
It may sound, I guess not, but to me it was a little weird. It was just how small the actual PON, I'll call it the PON manager, actually is, because it uses very little resources. Generally, when I'm using for, I'll say, other PON systems and things, they can be pretty resource intensive, that you may need a relatively large VM with maybe even up to like 30 vCPUs and things, and 96, 120, like depending on the things, gigs of RAM. So large resources. For here, I mean, it's relatively light for everything. Now, it's going to be a little bit smaller because it is a lab install, so they consolidate it. But even if you would do a full install for up to 100K customers, it's still not that large of an install for everything that it manages. And yeah, it's just relatively surprising because, for instance, maybe I want to just install this on a NUC or something. It's possible with these things for small workloads and things.
So the Cisco Learning Path has been on WWT.com for a little bit, and I see people launching the lab and enrolling in it. What is the sneak peek into the next piece of content you're creating? Is there a new lab or a new learning path you're creating? Kind of give the audience a sneak peek into what's next.
So, well, I don't have any fun pictures and things necessarily, but what I'm working on next is going to be around I'm going to call it virtual CMTS on OpenShift. So for those that are in the DOCSIS world, we're transitioning to a virtualized infrastructure, like, unsurprising, many things are, and using OpenShift. So everything's moving to containers and using OpenShift. And this will also be managing some other products as well. So it won't just be, the DOCSIS workloads, but other workloads that we may have that people use, like a wireless access gateway for wireless networks, or a broadband network gateway for PON networks, for instance, because generally you would have a BNG sitting behind all these things for additional subscriber management, security, information, billing, all that fun stuff that people like to worry about. So
thank you. And thank you for the presentation and time today. So everybody, I thank you for attending today's hands-on live lab workshop. This recording will be published to WWT.com as well as YouTube in the upcoming weeks. Upcoming in 2 weeks from now, on May 22nd, Justin Barnes will be joining us for another hands-on live workshop around some cybersecurity red team tools, one called MFS Council and the other called Bloodhound. So be on the lookout for invites to that next live event that's coming out soon. With that, I appreciate everybody's time and interest today and hope you learned something. With that, have a great day, everybody. Thank you.